In a farm devastated by drought, the Pope's surprise visit changes everything when he blesses a dry well. Days later, miraculous water springs from the depths, transforming the property into a green refuge. The skeptical farmer, confronted by the inexplicable, discovers that the true miracle was the renewal of faith and community, a journey of resilience and spiritual transformation that will touch your soul. Subscribe, like, and tell us where you're watching this inspiring story. From the blazing sun scorched the earth as if it wanted to erase all memory of life. Deep cracks, resembling ancient scars, cut the red soil of James Miller's small ranch. That piece of land, inherited from his father who had inherited it from his grandfather, now looked like a page torn from the apocalypse, dry, barren, abandoned, even by hope. James's tired eyes scanned the vastness of his disillusionment, while his hands, calloused from decades of work, gripped the hoe handle like a shipwrecked man clinging to the last plank. 50 years. 50 long years without seeing a drought as devastating as the one now creeping across the high desert, devouring dreams and crops with the same voracity. "This land will still provide for us," he would murmur to himself every morning. As he went out to work, an assertion that, as the months passed, sounded more and more like a desperate prayer than a certainty. The cattle, once fat and gleaming, now showed prominent ribs, as if carrying on their bodies the map of the hunger plaguing the region. The crops, nothing but twisted stalks and yellowed leaves that refused to die completely, sustained only by stubbornness, the same stubbornness that kept James on his feet. On the porch of their simple adobe house, Mary, his wife of 40 years, watched, her husband with a mix of admiration and concern. Her face, marked by the sun and time, still held the serene beauty of someone who had found in faith the nourishment the land could no longer provide. "James, come eat something." "The sun's too high already," she called, knowing her husband would likely refuse. "Coming," he replied without turning, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if he could see beyond that vast, cloudless blue, as if he could, by sheer force of will, conjure storms. In the small kitchen, where the aroma of fresh coffee tried to mask the scarcity, the couple's 3 children talked in low voices. Peter, the oldest, 25 and with a broken dream of being an agronomist. Anna, 22, a teacher at the community school. And Matthew, the youngest at 17, whose eyes shone with a faith that not even the drought could extinguish. "Did you hear the news?" Matthew asked, leaning over the worn wooden table. "They say the Holy Father is coming to visit our region during the next full moon." Peter let out a bitter laugh. "And what does that change, Matthew? Since when do blessings fill bellies or make it rain?" "Don't talk like that," Anna reprimanded, casting a furtive glance at the door, fearing her mother would hear. "God willing, this visit might bring something good." "God," Peter whispered, the words sounding like sand between his teeth. "Where? Is he when the sun burns our crops and thirst kills our cattle?" The silence that followed was heavier than the heat seeping through the cracks in the window. It was the silence of unanswered questions, of seemingly ignored prayers, of faith that was sustained not by conviction, but by fear of the emptiness its absence would leave. Outside, James finally abandoned his vigil under the sun and walked slowly to the well in the back of the property. For 2 years, that opening in the earth was just a dry hole, a broken promise, a constant reminder of abandonment. Even so, every day, in a ritual mixing habit and stubbornness, he would lower the bucket tied to a rope, knowing it would come back empty. That morning, however, something different happened. Hearing the sound of the bucket hitting the bottom of the well, James felt a tightness in his chest. It wasn't the usual dry thud, but a muffled noise, almost wet. Confused, he pulled the bucket up harder than necessary. Empty, as he expected, but at the bottom, a damp stain defied his disbelief. "I must be going crazy," he murmured to himself, rubbing his tired eyes. The sun was known to play tricks on the minds of men in the desert, creating mirages that fed hope, only to destroy it later. Meanwhile, in the small community church, Father Anthony gathered the faithful to officially announce the Supreme Pontiff's visit. The news, which had previously been just a rumor, now took on the contours of truth. spreading through the region like a long absent wind. "Our town has been chosen to receive the Holy Father during his visit to the country," the priest announced, his voice trembling with emotion. "He wants to meet the rural communities affected by the drought, hear our stories, share our sorrows." A murmur of excitement rippled through the church. Faces marked by hardship lit up with renewed hope. Everyone, except Mrs. Celestina, an 80-year-old woman who knew the desert herbs like the lines on her own hand. The man in white will bring changes, she pronounced in a voice that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. Sleeping waters will awaken at the touch of his hands. The old healer's words provoked diverse reactions. Some crossed themselves, seized by a reverent fear. Others smiled, condescending towards what they considered the delusions of a tired mind. And some, like Mary, kept those words in their hearts, like seeds that would eventually sprout. The news reached the Miller Ranch during lunch, brought by Anna, who was returning from Mass. Mary immediately began making plans, imagining how they could participate in the celebrations, while Matthew couldn't contain his excitement. "We have to go, Dad," the young man exclaimed. "The Pope is Christ's representative on earth." James slowly chewed his rationed beans, his face impassive like a mask carved in stone. "What good is a holy man's visit if it doesn't bring rain?" he finally asked, lifting his eyes from his plate. "It'll just be another show, more important people pretending to care about people like us." "James!" Mary reprimanded him, making the sign of the cross. "Don't talk about the Holy Father like that. I'm not speaking ill of him, woman. I'm just being realistic. This well has been dry for 2 years. The cattle are dying, and the seeds I planted last month haven't even sprouted. We need water, not blessings." Peter looked at his father with an expression that mixed agreement and sadness. He understood that skepticism. He felt it too, but something inside him, perhaps the last vestige of childhood faith or maybe the knowledge gained in his few years of college, whispered that they shouldn't close doors, not even those that seemed to lead nowhere. "An evaluation team is coming first," he commented casually. "I heard there's an experienced agronomist. Maybe they can identify solutions we haven't thought of." "Solutions." James repeated the word as if testing its flavor. "The only solution for this land is rain, son. It doesn't depend on technique. It depends on luck." The word God had gotten stuck in his throat, replaced by a more neutral, less committing one. In the weeks that followed, the community entered a frenzy of preparations. The simple houses got fresh coats of paint, the streets were cleaned, and rehearsals of religious hymns could be heard every evening at the church. The town's mission was clear: show the pontiff that, despite the hardships, they were still a people of faith. James watched the activity from a distance, refusing to participate actively in the preparations. However, at the insistence of Mary and the children, he agreed to receive the evaluation team that would visit properties in the region. And so, on a particularly hot morning, a dusty Jeep parked in the ranch yard. 3 people stepped out: a woman in a suit who introduced herself as a government representative, a young man with camera equipment, and a middle-aged man with tanned skin and attentive eyes, the agronomist. Mr. Miller, the government representative, greeted, extending her hand. "We've come to assess the conditions of the properties for the report that will be presented to the Holy Father." James shook the offered hand reluctantly, noticing how soft it was, without calluses, hands that had never fought the earth. The agronomist, Dr. Charles Peterson, wasted no time with formalities. While the government representative asked protocol questions about the drought and its effects, he was already walking the property, analyzing the soil, observing the slope of the land, taking notes in a worn notebook. "Your land has incredible potential for water harvesting," he commented upon returning, his eyes shining with the enthusiasm of someone who sees possibilities where others only see problems. "With a few simple adaptations, we could create a system that makes better use of the little rain that falls." "What rain?" James laughed without humor. "We haven't seen a drop in months." "Eventually it will rain," the agronomist replied with quiet certainty, "and when it does, we need to be ready." That conversation sparked something in Peter. After the team left, he approached his father with a proposal. What if they tried to implement some of Dr. Peterson's suggestions? Simple techniques for moisture conservation, dew harvesting, soil preparation. With what money, Peter? James asked, exhausted. We barely have enough to eat. We could try for a loan, Dad. The government has special programs for drought-affected regions. More debt? To bet on techniques that might not work? No, son. We'll do as we've always done. Endure until the rain comes back. The discussion ended there, but the seed of disagreement had been sown. In the days that followed, Peter began implementing some of the techniques suggested by the agronomist in a small area, without informing his father. It was his silent form of rebellion, his bet on the future. The day of the papal visit approached like a party without joy for James. Against his will, he agreed to accompany the family to the official reception that would take place in the town square, more out of love for them than for any expectation of change. On the eve of the big day, something unexpected happened. Dark clouds began to form on the horizon, timid at first, then growing denser until they covered the sky like a mantle of promises. The entire community watched the sky with a mix of hope and distrust. They had been fooled many times before. Do you think it will rain, Dad? Matthew asked, stopping beside James, who was contemplating the horizon. Maybe, he replied, trying to contain his own hope. Or maybe it's just another taunt from the sky. That night, while the family slept, James remained awake, listening to the wind that had begun to blow. There was something different about it, something that carried the distant scent of rain. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself a brief prayer, an almost embarrassed whisper. If you're listening, send a sign. Anything. Dawn brought an even heavier sky. In town, preparations for the Pope's reception took on a frantic pace. What if it rained during the visit? Improvised tents were erected, raincoats hastily distributed. What would have been considered a problem before was now welcomed as an early blessing. The papal caravan was scheduled to arrive at noon. At 10 in the morning, the Miller family was already getting ready to leave, all wearing their best clothes, saved for special occasions that rarely happened. You look nice, Mary commented, seeing James in a dress shirt and slacks, clothes he only wore for weddings and baptisms. He smiled awkwardly, adjusting the hat he would wear until they reached the church entrance, as respect dictated. Let's go before I change my mind. They were about to leave when the first thunder echoed in the distance. It wasn't the typical claps announcing passing storms, but a deep, constant rumble, as if the sky was waking from a long sleep. It's really going to rain, Anna whispered, hope coloring her words. Let's wait for it to pass, James decided. If we leave now, we'll get soaked. But the rain didn't come as a passing curtain. It came like a revolution, like an army conquering long-lost territories. It began with thick, spaced drops that soon turned into torrents, washing away accumulated dust, filling depressions, turning the yard into a mud pit. I've never seen rain like this, Mary commented, watching from the window. It seems different. James didn't reply. He was paralyzed, torn between joy for the long-awaited rain and frustration at not being able to go to the papal reception. Deep down, an unanswered question. Was it a coincidence the rain arrived precisely on the day of the visit? What they didn't know as they watched the storm was that they weren't the only ones affected. On the main road, the papal entourage was facing difficulties. The unpaved roads quickly turned into treacherous mud, and one of the vehicles in the caravan, precisely the one transporting the Supreme Pontiff, ended up sliding off the road while trying to avoid sudden erosion. It wasn't a serious accident, but enough for security to decide to seek shelter at the nearest property, the Miller Ranch. The sound of approaching engines alerted the family. Peter was the first to run to the window. Cars are coming onto the property, he announced, confused. Official cars. Before they could process the information, firm knocks sounded at the door. Mary instinctively smoothed her hair and dress, while James hesitated. Open it, Dad, Anna insisted. When the door finally opened, James found himself facing a middle-aged man in a soaked dark suit. "Excuse me, sir," the man said with a foreign accent. "I'm part of His Holiness's security. We had a slight mishap on the road due to the rain. Would it be possible for us to take shelter here briefly?" The words took a moment to make sense to James. His Holiness? Here? In his house? "Of course," he finally replied, stepping back. "Come, do nie when so." In the most improbable of twists, the humble living room of the Miller family became the stage for an unplanned papal visit. The pontiff, a man of medium height and a gentle smile, entered the residence accompanied by a reduced retinue, profusely thanking them for their hospitality. "God guided us here," he said in simple but correct English, extending his hand to James. "The rain is His way of showing us new paths." James shook the offered hand, mute with astonishment. Years of skepticism and resentment seemed to weigh on him, preventing him from finding adequate words. It was Mary who broke the silence, stepping forward with tears in her eyes. "Holy Father, what an honor. Our home is simple, but you are most welcome. May I offer you some coffee?" The pontiff's smile lit up the room as if a sunbeam had pierced the heavy clouds. "I would love that, my daughter. American coffee is a gift from God." In the 2 hours that followed, something happened that no official preparation could have provided. A genuine encounter. Sitting at the rustic kitchen table, the Pope talked with the family about the difficulties they faced, listened to their stories, shared experiences from communities in similar situations around the world. "Faith is like coffee," he said at one point, raising his cup. "It needs to go through the fire to reveal its true aroma." To everyone's surprise, it was James who spoke. The most. As if a dam had broken, he shared his frustrations, his fears, the feeling of abandonment that had consumed him for years. "Sometimes I think God has forgotten this place," he admitted, his eyes fixed on the table. "That He left us here to test how much we can endure." The Pope offered no easy answers or empty consolations. Instead, he told an old parable about a farmer who, during a devastating drought, continued to prepare the soil and plant seeds, being ridiculed by everyone. When they asked him why he kept planting without rain, he replied, "If I don't plant, I'm sure I won't harvest. If I plant, I still have a chance." That, my son, is the essence of faith. Not the certainty that everything will turn out right, but the conviction that it is worth trying. Something in that story touched James deeply. It wasn't so different from what he himself did, continuing to work the land even when everything indicated it was useless. When the rain finally decreased, the entourage prepared to leave. Before leaving, the Pope asked to see the property. Despite the mud and the tracks left by the rain, James felt an unexpected pride in showing the land that, despite everything, he still considered his home. It was when they passed the old well, in the back of the property, that the most striking moment happened. The Pope stopped, observing the simple stone structure, the bucket hanging on the worn rope. "Is this well dry?" he asked. "For 2 years," James replied. "Before that, it sustained us for 3 generations." The pontiff was silent for a moment, as if listening to something beyond the sound of the rain, which was now falling more softly. Then, in a gesture that seemed both simple and solemn, he approached the edge of the well and made the sign of the cross over it. "Water is a symbol of life and renewal," he said in a low voice, almost as if speaking to the well itself. "May this place be a source of blessings again for your family and community. Perhaps God still has plans for these waters." There were no lightning flashes, no supernatural lights, no angelic choirs like in miracle stories, just the sound of the rain diminishing and the wind rustling the leaves of the few resilient trees. When the papal entourage finally left, they left behind a transformed family. Mary and the children were bursting with happiness, repeatedly recounting every detail of the improbable visit. James, for his part, remained quiet, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions he had experienced. That night, alone on the porch, watching the last drops of rain, he allowed himself a reflection he had been avoiding for years. What if he was wrong? What if, besides stubbornness and hard work, there was something more sustaining his persistence? Something he, out of pride or fear, refused to name. The days that followed the papal visit and the unexpected rain brought a renewed energy to the region. People commented on how the soil, so long parched, seemed to absorb the water differently, as if the earth had relearned how to drink. On the Miller Ranch, life continued its course, now with a hint of hope. The rain, though intense, had been fleeting. Not enough to end the drought, but enough to nourish dreams. It was Matthew who first noticed something unusual. 3 days after the Pope's departure, while helping his father check for rain damage, he stopped abruptly near the well. "Dad, look at this," he called, pointing to the ground around the structure. James approached, skeptical. What could be so? Then he saw. Small green shoots, almost imperceptible, were emerging from the earth. Around the well, young plants, determined, defying the logic of the drought. They must have been dormant seeds awakened by the rain, he explained, trying to contain his astonishment. It happens sometimes. But as the days passed, the phenomenon intensified. The circle of vegetation around the well expanded, forming a ring of life in the surrounding aridity. Neighbors began to notice, and soon the news of the miracle of the blessed well spread through the community. "It's a sign," Mrs. Celestina affirmed when visiting the property a week after the Pope's departure. "Exactly. As I said." James heard those comments with growing discomfort. Part of him wanted to believe in something extraordinary, but another part, the most ingrained, the one that had protected him from disillusionment for so long, resisted fiercely. It was on that same day, driven more by irritation with the rumors than by any real expectation, that he decided to inspect the well more closely. The bucket, as always, was lowered to the bottom, but this time the sound that returned was not the usual dry thud. It was a splash. James's heart raced. With trembling hands, he pulled the rope. The bucket, for the first time in 2 years, came back heavy, and when it finally emerged, it was full of water. Not muddy or stagnant, but crystalline, reflecting the afternoon sun like a mirror. "Mary," he shouted, his voice betraying an emotion he hadn't felt in a long time. "Mary, come see this." In a few minutes, the whole family gathered around the well, watching in disbelief what seemed impossible. The water had returned, and not just a trickle, but a consistent flow that, according to Peter after a quick check, indicated the water table had risen considerably. "How is this possible?" Anna murmured, touching the water as if she feared it would vanish upon contact. No one had an answer, at least none that could be expressed in purely rational terms. The news of the water in the previously dry well spread like wildfire. In a matter of days, people from nearby towns began to appear, wanting to see with their own eyes what they called the Pope's miracle. James, initially uncomfortable with the attention, tried to explain the phenomenon in natural terms. "The rain must have cleared some underground channel," he would say. "Or maybe it was just a fortunate coincidence." But deep down, a question haunted him. What if it wasn't just a coincidence? What if there was some connection between the pontiff's blessing and the sudden return of the water? The possibility, even if remote, haunted him as much as it comforted him. A month after the papal visit, the transformation on the Miller Ranch was visible. The area around the well had become an oasis of green, contrasting dramatically with the rest of the landscape still marked by the drought. Peter, with Matthew's help, had implemented a rudimentary irrigation system that took water from the well to small experimental gardens. "We need to be cautious," the young man warned his father. "We don't know how long this water will last." But, to everyone's surprise, the well level did not drop, no matter how much they extracted. It was as if an underground source, long dormant, had awakened with renewed vigor. It was also during this period that the first significant conflict arose. Orlando Thompson, the wealthiest and most influential rancher in the region, appeared on the Miller property without warning. Tall, stout, with a leather hat that seemed more a symbol of status than protection from the sun, he examined the well with calculating eyes. "Impressive, James," he commented, not entirely hiding his envy. "Looks like luck has finally turned in your favor." "It wasn't luck," James replied dryly. "It was hard work and a special blessing," Orlando completed with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. That's what I came to talk about. I have a proposal for you." The proposal was seemingly generous. Orlando wanted to buy the property for a price far above market value, with the intention of building a sanctuary for pilgrims there. "Think of the possibilities, James," he insisted. "Your family would be financially secure, and this place would be preserved as a symbol of faith for the whole region." What Orlando didn't mention, but James intuited, was that the real interest was in the water, an increasingly precious resource in those times of prolonged drought, and something within him, perhaps the same instinct that had kept him working the land when all seemed lost, told him that selling would be betraying not only the inheritance from his father and grandfather, but also something deeper that was beginning to awaken in his heart. "I need to think about it," he finally replied. "This place has been my home my whole life." Orlando wasn't satisfied with the answer but kept his artificial smile. "Of course, James, take your time to think. But remember, opportunities like this don't come around twice." After the rancher left, a heated discussion erupted in the family. Mary and Anna were inclined to immediately reject the offer, seeing it as a kind of desecration. Peter was divided, recognizing the financial value of the proposal but questioning Orlando's true intentions. Matthew surprisingly remained silent, watching his father with eyes that seemed to see beyond the immediate conflict. It was during this discussion that the young man finally spoke, his calm voice contrasting with the others' agitated tones. "Dad, ever since the Holy Father was here, I've been thinking a lot. About life, about purpose." He paused as if gathering courage. "I want to study to become a priest." The announcement dropped like a bombshell in the already tense room. James stared at his youngest son with a mixture of shock and incomprehension. Of all the unexpected developments lately, this seemed the most surreal. "A priest? You? But why?" "Because I felt a calling," the young man replied simply. "When I saw the Pope here, so humble despite his position, talking with us like equals, I realized that's what I want to do. Serve as a bridge between God and people." Mary, with tears in her eyes, hugged her son. For her, there was no greater honor than having a son dedicated to religious life. Anna smiled, proud of her younger brother. Peter, though surprised, respected the decision, recognizing in it the same conviction he himself felt about agronomy. James, however, felt strangely betrayed. He had always imagined Matthew would take over the ranch one day, continuing the family legacy. The idea that his youngest son would follow such a distinct path left him disoriented. "We need more time to discuss this," was all he managed to say. "It's not a decision you make overnight." But as the words left his mouth, James knew he was being unfair. After all, wasn't he the one who always told his children to follow their own paths? Why then did he feel so shaken by Matthew's choice? The why answer came in a flash of self-knowledge. Because his son's decision brought to the surface his own unresolved issues with faith, with God, with everything that had been happening since that improbable visit. In the months that followed, the Miller Ranch became a regional phenomenon. What had begun as a revitalized well transformed into a true oasis. The water, besides being abundant, proved to be special. Visitors reported relief for skin problems after bathing in it, and plants irrigated with that water grew with unusual vigor. Mary, inspired by the events, began leading prayer meetings on the property. Women from the community gathered weekly under the shade of an old mesquite tree to pray the rosary and share stories of faith. James observed these gatherings from a distance, divided between pride for his wife's natural leadership and discomfort with his family's increasingly explicit religiosity. It was during this period that a team of scientists from the state university arrived in the region, interested in studying the well phenomenon. Led by a respected hydrogeologist, they conducted extensive tests on the water and surrounding soil. "The results are fascinating," explained Dr. Carmen Rodriguez to the gathered family. "The water from this well contains an unusual concentration of beneficial minerals, including some with recognized therapeutic properties." "Is this normal?" Peter asked, his agronomist's mind fully engaged. "It's rare but not supernatural," the scientist replied with a smile. "There are documented cases of hot springs and springs with similar mineral compositions. The unusual thing here is that these minerals weren't present, at least not in this concentration, in analyses done in the region a few years ago. And how do you explain that? James insisted. Dr. Rodriguez hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Scientifically speaking, it could be the result of subtle tectonic movements that altered the composition of the water table. Or perhaps, the intense rain unlocked access to a deeper, mineral-rich aquifer. She paused meaningfully. But as a scientist, I also recognize that there are phenomena that defy purely material explanations. The scientific confirmation of the water's special properties brought a new dimension to what many were already calling a miracle. It wasn't just faith or superstition. There was tangible evidence that something extraordinary was happening on that piece of land. For James, the scientific results brought a strange comfort, as if they gave him permission to believe without feeling he was completely abandoning the rationality he had always valued. 8 months after the papal visit, a dramatic contrast marked the region's landscape. While most of the high desert continued to suffer from the persistent drought, the Miller Ranch had become an oasis of prosperity. The irrigation system, expanded and perfected by Peter with the help of a government program that was finally approved, had transformed previously unproductive areas into verdant fields. The herd, once skeletal, had regained weight and health. The harvests, modest at first, became increasingly abundant, and most notably, all of this happened while neighboring properties continued to struggle against the aridity. The transformation wasn't just physical. James, previously known for his skepticism and introversion, had become more open and reflective. On full moon nights, he could be seen sitting by the well in a contemplative silence that seemed more like prayer. "What do you do out there every night?" Mary asked him once, curious about these solitary vigils. "I talk," he replied simply. "With whom?" James smiled, a smile that carried the weight of a deep inner journey, still ongoing. "With my father, my grandfather, with God. I'm still learning the difference." The fame of the miraculous ranch, as some called it, continued to grow. Pilgrims from increasingly distant regions arrived daily, wanting to see the blessed well, perhaps take some water with them, or simply share in that atmosphere that seemed to vibrate with a special energy. At first, James felt uncomfortable with so many strangers invading his space. But gradually, he realized there was something deeply human in that search, something he himself was beginning to understand: the need to believe in possibilities beyond those visible to the naked eye. It was in this context that the third and most challenging twist occurred. A delegation of businessmen, led by an executive from a multinational bottled water company, presented themselves at the ranch with a proposal that made Orlando's previous offer seem insignificant. "What we offer, Mr. Miller," the executive explained in polished English, "is a partnership to commercialize the water from this source. Preliminary analyses show potential for a premium line of bottled water with therapeutic properties. We're talking about a global market, an opportunity to put your ranch and this entire region on the world map." The numbers presented were astronomical. More money than James had ever dreamed of seeing in his entire life. Enough money to secure the future of his children and grandchildren, to build the house Mary had always dreamed of, to travel the world if they wished. The proposal was tempting, extremely tempting. And this time, even Mary and Anna were inclined to consider it seriously. After all, they argued, they wouldn't be selling the land, just sharing its blessing with the world. Only Matthew voiced immediate reservations. "Dad, I don't think that's what the well represents. Turning it into a business, it feels wrong, somehow." James asked for time to think. He needed to reflect calmly, consult his conscience, and perhaps, he admitted to himself, consult that voice he was beginning to hear more clearly in his nights by the well. For 3 days and 3 nights, James barely slept. He walked the property, revisiting memories, confronting dilemmas. What did everything that had happened in recent months truly mean? Was it just a sequence of favorable coincidences, or was there a greater purpose at work? On the third night, sitting by the well under a starry sky that seemed closer and brighter than usual, James had a kind of epiphany. It wasn't a supernatural vision or a voice from the sky. It was something more subtle, and perhaps for that reason, more profound. A sudden clarity about what truly mattered. The next morning, he gathered the family. His eyes, though tired, shone with a quiet determination. "We're not going to sell the water," he announced. "Not the land either, and no partnerships with companies." Before they could protest, he continued, "That doesn't mean we're keeping the blessing just for ourselves. On the contrary, we're going to share it, but in a different way." The plan James then revealed surprised everyone with its wisdom and reach. The ranch would be transformed into a community cooperative where local farmers affected by the drought could learn sustainable farming techniques, have free access to the well water for irrigation in reasonable quantities, and participate in a collective marketing system for their produce. "What happened here wasn't by chance," he explained, his voice firm but gentle. "And it wasn't just for us. It was a gift entrusted to us to share." Peter was the first to support his father, seeing in the proposal the opportunity to put the knowledge he had acquired into practice. Anna, a teacher by vocation, was enchanted by the idea of creating an educational center associated with the cooperative. Mary, proud, recognized in her husband's decision a wisdom she had always known he possessed, even when it seemed lost under layers of bitterness. And Matthew, the young man whose decision to enter religious life had initially shaken his father, smiled with an understanding that went beyond his few years. "This is faith in action, Dad. This is what the world needs." The 11th month after the papal visit saw the birth of the Waters of Hope Cooperative. What had begun as an idea in the mind of a farmer, transformed by the experience of a miracle, now took concrete form. The news spread, attracting young people who had abandoned the land in search of opportunities in the cities. Many returned, bringing with them knowledge and energy that, combined with the traditional wisdom of the elders, created a powerful synthesis of innovation and respect for roots. James, previously reserved and distrustful, discovered an unexpected talent for community leadership. Not an imposing or centralized leadership, but one that grows naturally from example and mutual respect. The secret of the land, he would explain to the new members of the cooperative, is to treat it not as a servant that must produce, but as a partner that deserves care. The same goes for people, for the community, for everything that is alive. Mary, for her part, coordinated a community garden program that was already feeding needy families in the region. Anna developed educational materials on sustainable agriculture for local schools. Peter, finally able to complete his agronomy studies thanks to a special scholarship, divided his time between the university and the practical application of innovative techniques at the cooperative. And Matthew, although already preparing to enter the seminary the following year, dedicated himself to documenting the stories of transformation occurring in the community. Stories that spoke not only of material prosperity, but of spiritual and human renewal. When exactly 1 year had passed since the papal visit, the Miller Ranch, now officially the headquarters of the Waters of Hope Cooperative, prepared for a special celebration. The Vatican itself had sent a representative to evaluate the increasingly frequent reports about the miracle of the well. Monsignor Joseph Rinaldi, an elderly man with lively and observant eyes, had spent the week interviewing people, analyzing scientific reports, observing the cooperative's activities. His discreet but attentive presence aroused curiosity about what the church's official conclusion on the events would be. On the morning of the celebration, an intense blue sky blessed the event. Hundreds of people gathered in the ranch yard, now expanded to accommodate community activities. A simple altar had been erected near the well, where Father Anthony would celebrate a special mass. Before the ceremony began, Monsignor Rinaldi requested a final interview with James. Alone, near the well that had triggered everything, the Vatican representative asked the crucial question. "Mr. Miller, after everything you've seen and lived, do you believe that what happened here was truly a miracle? That the Holy Father's blessing somehow caused the water to return and the subsequent transformations?" James looked at the well, then at the sky, then at the celebration being prepared in the distance. His face, still marked by the sun and hardships, now also bore the lines of a frequent smile, of a newfound peace. "Monsignor," he finally replied, "the true miracle wasn't the water gushing from the well, but the transformation of hearts, including I own." He paused, organizing thoughts he had matured for months. "For years I looked at the sky waiting for rain, blaming God when it didn't come. I didn't realize that the real drought wasn't in the land, but in me. What the Holy Father did, with his simple presence and kind words, was remind me to look beyond what is visible. I learned," he continued, "to see God not just in big events but in everyday generosity, in the renewal of nature, in the human capacity to start over. And perhaps the greatest miracle is precisely this, the ability to see the extraordinary, hidden in the ordinary, to recognize that we are part of something greater than ourselves." Monsignor Rinaldi smiled, an expression that suggested he had found exactly what he had come looking for. "You know, Mr. Miller, the Holy Father would be very happy to hear those words. They capture the essence of what he tries to teach, that true faith isn't in waiting for supernatural interventions, but in recognizing the divine presence in ordinary life, in serving others, in caring for creation." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of bells announcing the start of the celebration. Together, the transformed farmer and the papal envoy walked toward the gathered crowd. The Mass, celebrated by Father Anthony with the assistance of Monsignor Rinaldi, was a moment of deep communion. People from different backgrounds, ages, and paths gathered in gratitude not just for the revitalized well, but for the entire community transformation that had stemmed from it. At the end of the ceremony, James was invited to make a symbolic gesture. With Peter and Matthew's help, he planted a small olive tree beside the well, a biblical tree that symbolizes peace, renewal, and hope. As the young priest sprinkled holy water on the plant, something extraordinary happened. Without prior warning, without visible clouds on the horizon, a gentle rain began to fall. It wasn't the violent storm of that fateful day, but a delicate drizzle, almost a caress from the sky, what the people of the desert call a blessing rain. The drops reflected the sunlight, creating a spectacle of colors that seemed to envelop everything in a luminous embrace. No one ran for shelter. On the contrary, faces lifted, arms opened, smiles bloomed as the water, a symbol of life and renewal, sealed the cycle of transformation that had changed not just a ranch, not just a family, but an entire community. And James, feeling the gentle rain on his face, finally understood what the Pope had meant so many months before. Faith is like planting during a drought, an act of hope that sometimes blossoms in the most unexpected places and moments, transforming arid land into fertile soil, despair into hope, and hardened hearts into a source of blessings for many. The miracle, after all, wasn't just in the water that gushed from the well, but in the revelation that each of us, like that seemingly dry well, holds dormant possibilities within that are just waiting for the touch of grace to awaken.